Tales of the Legion Project podcast, Brave and the Bold number 5 for JLMay 2023. Hello and welcome to this 14th episode of the Tales of the Legion Project podcast. I am your host, Eric.
And I'm your host, Peter.
And Peter and I are here today, a very special episode of Tales of the Legion Project podcast, to discuss Brave and the Bold number 5 from 2007 as part of the JLMay 2023 event. Peter, so for those who may not know, as I did not, I'm one of the uneducated. What is JLMay?
So JLMay is a podcast crossover event that started in 2016, and it was spearheaded by the folks over at the Waiting for Doom podcast and another podcast or Dial F for Flanger, Paul and Ange. And it is a celebration not only of podcasts, you know, that whether they're in their own network or they have a community of friends, much like we have people that, you know, we talk to in the podcast community. It's a celebration of podcasting coming together, but also of, as the title implies, the Justice League of America. So in 2016, the very first crossover event took a look at JLA Year One by Mark Waid, speaking of Mark Waid, and Barry Kitson. And every podcast that participates takes a look at one issue, maybe two issues. But what they do is they divide up the issues of a title among the podcasters, and it's kind of like a round robin thing. You just go from one podcast to the next until you've listened to everybody talking about one particular issue in a title. JLA Year One, there's only 12. They might have thrown in some other things. I think some people did look at earlier Justice League Origins for that event. 2017, they took a look at Alex Ross's Justice series, also a 12-issue series.
I should go back and find those episodes then, because I guess I'm currently rereading that series.
That's right. 2018, they took a look at the Silver Age 5th week event. DC used to do a bunch of those. I used to like those. 2019, they did Blackest Night. I have to imagine the event and maybe some crossovers. 2020, Countdown to Infinite Crisis. And in 2021, 2021, they did Mary Marvel Marching Society. So it came out in March. And they did it on the Acts of Vengeance crossover. I don't know if they did any in 2022, but 2023, we are back and doing Brave and the Bold, the 2007 series, 30-some issues. So they have a handful of podcasters this time around taking a look at one or two. Sometimes they do more than one.
And so this is running through all of May,
all
2023.
of May. Yes.
That's a lot of podcast listening about a series.
If you've ever wanted to read the series, it is on the DCU app. You could read along every day. And the idea is that you're also supposed to release the episode on the date that coordinates with the issue that you're doing. So this is Brave and the Bold 5. Eric will be releasing it on May 5th because I always release these episodes usually a week or 2 weeks later because I'm never caught up. But you will definitely get it on Eric's feed on the 5th, which is Friday or Saturday or something like that.
I don't know. Friday. It is Friday. Yes.
It is Friday. Yes.
Excuse me. So then obviously you should, whatever day you release it, if it's not the 5th, you should release it on a day that ends in 5.
Oh, sure. There you go. I can do that. That I could probably manage more than, yeah. So that's it. That's the event. And as far as the content, it's basically the same. We just take a look at an issue of a comic, just like we do on the regular Legion Project podcast, just like we do sometimes here on the Tales um, podcast. And we put it into a Tales because this is our way to take a look at the Legion of Superheroes, usually outside of the normal publishing continuity that we're dealing with on the main feed. And this is great. I think when I was invited to do this from Paul from the Waiting for Doom podcast, there were many issues that were already taken. I think that the Teen Titans specific issues were taken, and I don't remember if this issue was offered or if it was like, oh, it's Legion of Superheroes. Great, I'll do that one. And I think I also wanted to do a Perez focused one as well.
Oh yeah. Yeah, good choice.
Yeah. So so it just worked out that this was a perfect subject for our podcast here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting. As I said before, I didn't know about JLMay. And it sounds like from earlier years, I may have missed a bunch of these because I listened to a lot of the podcasts that are on this list for JLMay. So either I must have listened to some episodes not realizing they were part of an event, or I've just forgotten, which is probably more accurate because I can never remember anything. So yeah, this would be a lot of fun to go back and like I said, I want to listen to that Justice one.
Mm-hmm.
The Blackest Night, I love that event.
Mm-hmm.
So that'd be fun to go listen to all those shows, talk about those issues.
Right.
And now we get to do Brave and the Bold.
That's right. And at the end of the episode, I will just quickly run through all the other titles from the podcasts that are participating. But I do want to make mention that you are listening to issue 5 of Brave and the Bold, our coverage. Issue 4 was done by the LEGIONPOD cast, all acronymed, right? Which is hosted on the Legion of Substitute podcaster site. It's also hosted on the Resurrections podcast Tumblr site, which is run by Al Sedano. Issue 4 was featured Supergirl and Lobo, which is referenced in this issue. And then, so you, if you're coming here from that podcast and that discussion, awesome, welcome. If this is your first time listening to the Legion Project, and then once you're done with this episode, go and listen to the coverage for issue 6, which can be found and produced by Teal Productions, hosted by Ed Moore, over on Comic Book Noise, the Comic Book Noise family feed. And that issue is about Green Lantern and Batman, which will be a continuation of our conversation out of this. So,
as I recall, this 2007 Brave and the Bold series started off with Batman and Green Lantern, and with issue 1.
Yes.
And that was the neat thing about this new version of the title, as I recall from, it's not 20 years ago, but it's getting close. Whatever it is, was that it wasn't just done in one team ups, and it wasn't necessarily just Batman. And maybe in this first 6 issues it was, but what, as we'll find out in this issue, it was an ongoing story featuring a bunch of different characters that were teaming up over the course of that story. Right. And we'll touch on that for this particular issue as well. But that was one of the most exciting things for me reading this series. Not to mention, of course, the return of George Perez to an ongoing title, at least at first.
Yes.
So yeah, that was I loved this series, or recall loving this series very much back when I was reading it.
Yeah, in very many ways, it is a round robin title, just like this crossover event.
Yeah, exactly. There you go.
Yeah. For instance, yes, issue number 1 is Batman and Green Lantern, but issue number 6 is Green Lantern and Batman. They switch title billing. Batman was in issue 3 with Batman and Blue Beetle, issue 5. And then from there, until this storyline ends, he does not get title billing anymore until issue 13, but that's a new story arc. So Yeah, it is for those people who don't know, Brave and the Bold was well, originally it just was a series, right? It wasn't a crossover team up book
Mm-hmm. Right.
when it,
I think that's correct. Yeah.
yeah. It was just one of DC's titles at the time. In fact, the very first, it was more an anthology book. The first
Mm,
issue had the Golden Gladiator, the Viking Prince, and the Silent Knight.
yeah.
And I know there's a specific issue where Batman takes over. I don't, and actually, it becomes a crossover book before Batman,
Mm-hmm.
a team up book before Batman takes it over. Looks like maybe somewhere around the 60s is when, oh no, 59. Prior to that, there were team ups. Prior to that, there were also strange sports stories, Hawkman stories, the first appearance of the Justice League of America in issue 28. There you go. There's your. We were trying to figure out beforehand the Justice League of America connection. Well, there it is. I forgot. It's the very anthology title that the Justice League of America was created in issue
Yeah.
number 28.
Yeah.
The Teen Titans
I
had their
say
first
Teen
appearance.
Titans. Yeah.
Yep. And then eventually it became a Batman team up book, and you could say it is also the spiritual predecessor to the Batman and Outsiders book, because
Mm,
in issue 200 they had a preview for Batman and the Outsiders, which would more or less take over this title. Not
yeah.
really, but sort of.
Yeah. It would definitely replace it in the publishing lineup.
Yes. And with the writer, right? Mike W. Barr wrote the last like 3 issues.
Mm,
So,
mm-hmm.
and Jim Aparo was part of the book here and there. So,
Well, he did several issues. I don't know if he was part of the last set of issues.
other than oh, he did a bunch. Yeah, he did
Yeah.
a bunch of Brave and the Bold. Oh my God. Wow. And obviously the preview for Outsiders. And he did the cover of, if the cover of a lot of issues, if nothing else. So, okay,
Mm-hmm.
good. Yeah, I was right. All right. That's a series I don't know. I don't know Brave and the Bold, the first
Ah.
volume, real well. Not like DC Comics Presents, which is like my probably my favorite DC team up book.
Well, it was both for me. Although I for some reason tended to buy more Brave and the Bold.
There you go.
But I did is in the last, I'll say, 10 years, I went on um, a buying binge, I guess, for those actually all the team up titles, Marvel and DC's,
Hmm.
and just but I was picking and choosing based on the team up character for the title. And so
Sure.
if it was a character I liked, or a character I was interested in, or whatever, then I would try to buy that actual issue. And I just actually so it's funny. Last year, no, beginning of this year, no, it was last year. Never mind. Um, I completed my read through of the remaining Brave and the Bold issues that I had not read. And so yeah, it was really fun to see, because there was, I don't know how much we want to get into this. You can cut this if you want, Peter.
No.
But those early issue, I got an early issue of a Batman team up, and it was just bonkers.
Yeah.
And there were some of those. I forget who the writer was. It may have been Bob Haney
Yes.
for some of those. Those were fun, bonkers, but fun.
Right.
And then we get, and then the title kind of, I thought of it as it kind of settled down, and then you got more basically mainstream Batman team up with whomever
Right.
issues, and
Right.
they were still good, obviously, but it's just those early issues were something else.
Yeah. And there's been a lot written about the title. I think it's relevant. We are talking about Brave and the Bold. There was a lot written about those Bob Haney stories taking place on Earth B,
Yeah,
I believe it is. So because they were so zany, or Batman was teaming up, like an Earth 1 Batman was teaming up with an Earth 2 character, but maybe the Earth 2 character was like an Earth 1 version or something like that. It was
yeah, yeah.
just a lot of oddities. So especially in terms of our issue, Batman versus Legion of Superheroes. I'm sure we'll talk about that. Those are two concepts that feel not right. they don't feel like they should belong together. So in the grand spirit of maybe those Bob Haney stories, there's some of that going on here. And there's a
Ooh,
lot of craziness. There's a lot of mixing of some characters make sense, other characters don't make sense. Some villains, the larger story that's going on behind the first 12 issues. Um, yeah, it still has that spirit of what is going on.
yeah. Yeah. I think Mark Waid and George Perez were really, I think they were kind of channeling that zany Bob Haney stuff.
Yeah, zany Bob Haney. All right, I think that's enough preamble. We can continue on. Let's dig into Brave and the Bold #5 for JLMay.
All right. This is titled The Lords of Luck, Chapter 5, The Batman of Tomorrow. This is by Mark Waid and George Perez as storytellers, credited as storytellers. Bob Wycheck, inks, Tom Smith, colors, Rob Lee, lettering, Stephanie Buscema, assistant editor, and Joey Cavalieri, editor, with a lovely Perez and Smith cover. The issue starts with a editor's note, which I wanted to highlight here. Note: the events of the story occur before JLA JSA, The Lightning Saga. I don't know how much we're going to get into that, but in terms of this issue, Brainiac 5 works to separate the fused Batman and Tharok as he explains Batman is in the 31st century, and while the technology may seem like magic to him, they cannot return Batman to the 21st century. Batman explains he arrived with Tharok because of the Haruspex. And I don't know if that's how you pronounce it, Peter. And here's my internal editor's note: a probability altering weapon. Brainiac 5 accurately predicts that the chronal energy in Batman's system would open temporal rifts, and the Legion disperses to deal with the threats. Batman tells Brainiac 5 to use the Haruspex to send him back in time, but it doesn't work, so Batman takes the device and escapes the Legion. Meanwhile, Supergirl, Green Lantern, and Adam Strange search Ran for the Book of Destiny. When they find it, they quickly learn so too have some others. Back in the 31st century, various Legionnaires attempt to capture Batman, with Karate Kid being the only one who is able to engage the Dark Knight detective for any length of time. Finally, Phantom Girl confronts Batman while holding the Haruspex. Boy, that's a tough word to say, saying it out loud so many times. But she is distracted by the arrival of Dream Girl from one of the temporal rifts. Batman tries to get Phantom Girl to fire the device at him to save the 31st century, but a Luck Lord arrives with the Book of Destiny and takes the device. It announces that, quote, as of today, the Luck Lords rule the cosmos. To be continued.
Have you read this issue before?
Yes. No, yeah, I have. I bought the issues when they were coming out in 2007, and but this came out in July of that year, I think, if Mike's Amazing World of Comics is correct, and and I haven't read it since, so it's been that long, which means so when I pulled this issue out, I read it to prepare for our talk, and I'm like, wait a minute, how did Batman get here? So I had to go back and start to be like you, Peter. I had to go back and read the first 4 issues so that I had a better understanding of the story.
Right.
Why Batman was there, why Tharok was there, why were they fused, all that good stuff. So
I read it too at the time. I was collecting it and reading it up to a certain point, then continued to collect it and then dropped off collecting it. I don't know if I have all of the 30 some issues. It really was at a time DC was just so amazing in the 2000s, and it was a no-brainer to pick this up because of my love of George Perez, obviously. But then when you look at the ads in the book too, like right in the smack middle of Morrison's Batman, a new Booster Gold series was coming out at the time. Even those early issues of Wonder Woman, another Outsiders book was coming out. Superman with Busiek and Pacheco, and while the main event, I guess you could say, was going on was not the best, right? Right on the cover, it says Countdown 41,
Mm-hmm.
which means it came out the same week as Countdown 41, and that event is not so beloved. Um, it certainly was an amazing time to be a DC reader, so there's a lot of my collection from around this time, that's for sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that I totally agree. There's so much energy coming out of DC Comics at that time that
Hmm.
yeah, it made me very excited to read a bunch of stuff from them. And so yeah, but I also remember there's a lot of I guess it's always around, but there was a lot of hate is probably too strong a word. Anti DC, a segment of fandom was anti DC at that time too. But yeah, here we are today with the same thing.
So around this time, there was a Legion of Superheroes title, Supergirl and the Legion of Superheroes, which had been renamed from just regular Legion of Superheroes. That was up to issue 32 at this point. Mark Waid had already been gone for about 2 or 3 issues by this point. The Lightning Saga that you referenced, that was in early 2007, April to June of 2000. So actually just wrapping up right before this issue comes out. And Final Crisis Legion of Three Worlds is 1 year away in August of 2008, just to give some context of like what's
Oh
going
wow.
on with the Legion of Superheroes at this point. So at this time, we have multiple legions around, and this will not be the last time Perez puts his mark on the Legion of Superheroes. So just to give a little context.
So a little, I guess, another shout out to the Legion of Substitute Podcasters because I was curious again about the whole the Legion in the Lightning Saga story compared to the Wade Kitson Legion. And I guess I was doing some searching anyway. Found out that Mark Wade had done an interview on the Legion of Substitute Podcasters, and
Cool.
they talked about that very uh, issue. Too many uses of the word issue here, but the how that made him and Barry feel when they were when Jeff Johns was off doing his thing in that storyline. So that was an interesting listen to. So if
Cool.
people are curious, they should go seek that episode out. I don't know what number that is, but I'm sure they can search and find that easily enough.
And to be fair, none of that takes place in this issue.
Oh
There's
yeah. Mm-hmm.
no reference to an alternate version of the team or however you want to look at it. It's pretty much smack in the middle of what the Legion was at this point. And that's actually one of my, like, if I have to, if we go to general thoughts about the issue, um, it is the three boot era, certainly in costume, sometimes in name, sometimes in powers, but in personality. If I was just reading this without the visuals, is it really all that different from some of the stuff we're reading now in terms of who they are,
That's true.
how
Yeah.
they're used,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
right? Um, maybe if it was, maybe that speaks to Mark Waid. If you're reading the three boot era with Mark Waid and Kitson and company, the differences probably are bigger. You probably feel them a little bigger because he's in the middle of his book. But this being a team up book, and you have to very quickly bring everybody up to speed on who characters are, aren't you always going to just revert to kind of their baseline
Yeah, exactly.
identity? Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
That was one of the first things that I noted on page one. They quickly orient you as to who the Legion is at this
Mm-hmm.
time. You get a nice group shot of them, and it explains um, a little bit about them. So I love how they ground how Wade and Perez ground us in this future reality with these characters.
The story, since this is the only issue I read for this episode, I thought the story beats, the story points all make sense. They fill you in. There are several exposition pages. They don't necessarily come across as huge swaths of dialogue like Claremont would write, but they are exposition. It's usually two characters talking to each other, like Green Lantern and Adam Strange, or Green Lantern updating Supergirl.
Hmm. Hmm.
Okay, it's exposition, but it's still dialogue, which I liked.
Yes, it's not, and it's not presented as you know, blah 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 blah.
Yes, yes, yes,
It's not
yes.
overt like that, and
Right,
that's I noticed that too. It's like they're Wade is doing a really good job of giving us enough information through the characterizations, so that he's orienting not just the characters within the story, but obviously us, so
right,
that we almost don't even need, even though I said I needed to go back and read those first four issues, we almost don't need that in terms of what is in this issue.
right. Probably the only questions I would have about this issue or about this story is, what was the impulse? What's the event that sparks this whole search for the Book of Destiny? How did he lose the book? How did Destiny, the character, lose the book in the first place? Why are
Mm-hmm.
the Luck Lords involved? Like, those are the larger questions that, if I'm picking up issue number 5, of course there's going to be previous story, um, but they weren't enough to make me be confused. I wasn't confused. And I certainly wasn't confused about the immediate story of like how Batman got to the 31st century. What are these devices? Even the subplot story with Supergirl and Green Lantern and Adam Strange. I don't necessarily like. I didn't know who the new rebel leader was, but Supergirl says that he was the one that stole the book in the first place. Okay, so that means I have to go, see. But it wasn't enough to confuse me. There's just information that might be missing, but it didn't stop me from enjoying the issue.
Yeah, minute details, really.
Having said that, though, I did think the issue was, does it further the does it further the larger story? I mean, in a way it does, but in essence, speaking back to the cover of why it says Batman versus Legion of Superheroes and not and, we certainly got that. I'm not sure what the Legion of Superheroes provide for the larger story other than as a backdrop to a new adventure, because Wade had to split Batman and Tharok, and the only way to do that is in the 30th century. Plus, it gives Perez a reason to draw them. Um, so that part of it, I don't consider it a slight against the book. It's just, okay. In all the chapters, what does this provide in terms of the larger story? I don't know because I haven't read them. So as I was reading, and I was like, oh, yeah, it really is just a verses. It's just a fight book, isn't it?
Yeah, it's very much an interlude, really,
Yeah.
to
Okay.
the overall plot, because the main thread of the whole Luck Lords thing and whatnot. I mean, I really, the Haruspecs, the device, while it's with Batman in the 31st century, and it is a component that the Luck Lords need, it's really the Book of Destiny that's driving it, as far as what the Luck Lords have. And so, yeah, like I said, it's more of an interlude. It's a bit of a diversion, and maybe perhaps I thought, slightly cynically, Wade was putting his Legion into this to help promote that book. I guess, I don't know.
Well, I
It's
mean,
possible.
he was already gone by that point,
Oh,
but
was he gone by that point?
yeah,
Okay.
yeah,
Okay. So yeah, well, or maybe he just wanted, one last shot at
sure,
doing something.
sure,
But yeah, it was a nice diversion,
yeah.
to read this. Like I said, I read those first four too, and of the four, this is the one that stands out to me because of the Legion.
Mm.
And there's one other issue. I think maybe the one before this with Supergirl and Lobo. I think you mentioned that earlier. Um, that's also fun because of those two pairing up in the way that they did.
Right, right.
So yeah, but of the four, is like I was saying to you before we started recording, I read them, but I couldn't tell you what happened in most of the first four issues, because
Hmm.
I don't know why. I read them and out they went in my brain. That could
Hmm.
just be, that's probably just me. Oh, my old brain is becoming Swiss cheese memory.
I have two other points, and then you can fill us in on how you felt about the issue. Further thoughts. The little interlude with Green Lantern, Adam Strange, and Supergirl did feel like an interruption more than anything. I was like, oh wow, there's more pages there than I thought. Now it is the nature of the book, as you described earlier, that it's more round robin. It is a larger story, so of course we're gonna check in. So I got that. And also, I am a sucker for Adam Strange beating on Hawk people. And I love Adam Strange, and I loved Adam Strange in this era with this particular look coming out of the Planet Heist maxi series that predated the Infinite Crisis stuff and predated um, the Ran Thanagar War miniseries that fed into like this whole 2003 to now era of Adam Strange. I was all in. So while that little interlude felt like a little more of an interruption than I thought it was going to be, I was like, oh hey, I'm here. I got it. I love it. It's great.
I had a similar thought about that. It seemed that part seemed like almost an unwanted interruption because I was so into the story of Batman and the Legion.
Right.
Even though there's some aspects of some of the characterizations that I just it just grated on my nerves, but
With who? With which part?
Brainiac 5
Oh, okay.
in
Okay.
particular.
All right. Well, we can talk about it. Well, I
Yeah.
mean, it's funny though, because I feel like the interlude is the one that is carrying the story more than the main
Oh,
plot,
definitely. Yes.
right? So
Yes.
it serves its purpose, and yet you're right. It says Batman versus Legion. Let me get that. I want
Yeah,
more.
exactly. So yeah, when I got to that first page of that interlude, I'm like, what? No, I want the other story.
And then
But yeah.
my final big thought is this title and this era really is kind of like the last great George Perez era.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it's a tour. He gets a chance once again to tour through the DC universe, and he does the same thing with the Legion in Legion of Three Worlds. He gets a chance to draw things that maybe he has yet to cross off of his checklist. Certainly, new characters, new versions or new characters. Uh, the backgrounds, the minor characters, the environments, the technology, not only in the 31st century, but then over on Ran, just giving his heart and soul to a title in the way that I feel like once the New 52 started, plus he had health issues, or,
Mm-hmm.
in the decade prior to this one, so or the decade after this book came out. Yeah, I mean, this feel like when I opened it up, I was like, yeah, this was the Paris that I was still madly in love with, and
Yeah.
yeah, just so great to see.
Yeah. I made note of his Perez doing Perez
Yeah,
in a few spots in this story. I'm like, this is so much fun to revisit. Um, yeah, I had made comments similar to that in a recent episode of mine about the New Teen Titans issue um, 38,
yes, yes.
and it's the same thing. It's like he was such an artist above so many. He truly an icon of superhero artistry, and it's so lovely to see
Hmm.
him still putting 1,000% into every page. Whereas, as you were talking, I was thinking, especially like background stuff and um, uh, tertiary characters. Other artists, nothing against them, but I don't know of another artist who pours their heart and soul as Perez did into everything that's on the page and not just the main characters that are driving the story. So
Right.
yeah, it's lovely stuff. I will say, I thought this was a much better Batman Legion team up than the previous Brave and the Bold volumes, Volume 1. That was issue number 179 from July of 1981.
Hmm.
Uh, it was kind of in my head. I didn't go back and reread it for this, but in my head I was thinking about that issue, and it was not a particularly good issue, but it had a very similar plot in terms of Batman accidentally showing up in the future and dealing with these teenagers of the future, and him, preventing a catastrophic event, and then he gets shipped back home. So very similar in those terms, but very differently told in this issue. So
Right.
much better team up.
Any other larger thoughts to this particular issue that you might have?
Not about the issue. I will say, because of the unusual name of the device, the Haruspex, and I don't know if I'm pronouncing this correctly.
Right.
I had to look it up because it's like that's too unusual, especially given that it's Wade writing it.
Same here.
That I had to look that up because I knew it had to mean something, right?
Yes. Yeah.
And so basically, I mean, there's a few different definitions, but it all boils down to essentially this. And I'm sure other people can, if I'm wrong, they can let us know. But a haruspex was a priest in ancient Rome who practiced divination, and this is the important part: divination by the inspection of the entrails of animals. So, as I said before, how did I put that? It's a probability altering weapon. I think that's even a phrase or a similar phrase that they use in this issue to
Mm-hmm.
describe that device. But it's all about what's the future, what's coming in the future type thing, and so that's why the Luck Lords need this device. With the Book of Destiny, they can use this device to alter things, which is how we get Batman and Tharok together in the 31st century.
Mm.
So
Okay. My definition that I found says one who looks at guts.
yeah. If only they had, because Perez, he could totally do that. He could give us this really gruesome but lovingly detailed set of entrails to look at. You want to talk about the cover?
Yeah, let's talk about the cover.
Well, you had already talked about something I was going to bring up. If you don't mind, I'll just jump in there with,
Yep.
the Batman versus Legion of Superheroes, which, by the way, is not in the digital edition on the DC Universe
right.
Infinite site. So I thought
Isn't
that
that
was
weird?
interesting.
Just
That
says
they,
goes back to and. Yeah.
yeah. I mean, that's there obviously on the cover, but it's almost like someone spray painted verses over the top of it. Um, and that's what actually led me to thinking about that original team up from earlier. So,
Mm-hmm.
and also we are now about 15 years later, we got JLA versus the Legion of Superheroes. Also, another version of the Legion that some folks may think of as not the real Legion. So Peter's raising his hand. So we got a Batman in silhouette in the background with his arm outstretched. It's basically half of him, which is a nice little detail given the situation that he's in with Tharok, although it's the other side, but that doesn't matter. And then we got all the Legionnaires within that shadow form
Mm-hmm.
outline. Yeah, there we go. I will say, so I read this back in 2007, put it away, brought it out for this. I looked at this issue 3 times before I realized, Peter, that the Legionnaires were within the Batman shape, because you can see the wings down below, the points of the wings, right? Those outlines. I didn't realize that at first for some reason. And then I also did not notice that he's wearing the Legion ring
Yeah.
until that third time I was looking at it. I was
Mm-hmm.
like, what? How did I miss that?
And that's a story point. So
Yes.
good on Perez for that. Well, the problem with the cover is it has the UPC symbol right down
That's true.
in a very bad place because it's interrupting the curves of the scallops of Batman's cape.
Yes, there you go. Scallops. Yes.
Yeah, I think that the whatever that is. So I was like, are those planets? Are those orbs? What's going on? And
That's that's what I thought. I thought they were orbs of some kind.
it wasn't until I looked at the DCU app that you get the fuller picture. And I was like, oh right, it's Batman's cape. They're within. Okay, I get it now. Like yeah, I agree. When you got to put on all that stuff. It's so interesting because I love the package of this book, the cardstocky cover,
Mm-hmm.
the interior pages are a little more matte. They have like some texture to
Yeah.
it, which I like.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Um, my fingerprints are all over the cover, but that's okay. Um, so I love the package, $3.99, $2.99, all those days.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but you're right, they got to slap all that stuff on it, and then it's like you're interrupting the, the hit of it, right? And
And there's no real place to put that UPC symbol. You could put it over in the bottom left corner, but then you're covering up Shadowlass.
right,
But I guess they could have not put Shadowlass there. Could have easily removed her and stuck it there. But
sure, yeah,
yeah.
yeah, it's a good cover. I mean, it's he's how many times are we going to say it? George is a master, right? And um, I wasn't quite sure who Invisible Kid was. That was the only one that I was like, wait, is that Timberwolf? Who is that?
Mm.
Just because I'm not familiar with their designs. But everybody else, if you're a Legion fan, you can kind of suss out who they are. Maybe Element Lad, you might think that that's Sun Boy.
I did actually.
Yeah,
Yeah. That and I too, I was like, I don't know who the kid is that is Invisible Kid at first.
right.
If I counted correctly,
Hmm.
16 Legionnaires here
Hmm.
um, that appear, even Invisible Kid. That's a callback for a previous conversation that Peter and I have had about Invisible Kid. Um, and yeah, and then we get on page one we get even more Legionnaires. So I'll probably talk about that as we get into the issue. But it's interesting because I think everybody on here has something to do or makes an appearance in this issue.
Hmm.
Although I'm now that I'm thinking about it, Shadowlass, does she actually do anything?
She flies. We
So
see her.
she's seen somewhere, yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
But most of the other characters actually do something in this or have something to do in this issue. So I thought that
Right.
was nice.
Right. Okay. So in terms of the story itself, it is Batman versus Legion of Superheroes. I thought Wade's portrayal of Batman in the 31st century was sort of spot on. Um, this his Batman is obviously not the brooding, um, gruff, mean-spirited Batman. It's also not the Morrison Batman who was like a sexy costume James Bond kind of, you know.
I don't think I've ever heard him described in that way, but it's perfect.
Yeah, I mean Morrison,
That's yeah.
he always was like, I write a Batman that has a big hairy chest, like it's just in love with, just always has women draping on him and is, so this very much is like a um it's not even Morrison JLA Batman. It's feels very much the superhero analytical calm but
Mm-hmm.
not unapproachable outside of beating up the teenagers. And he's got gadgets and Perez draws him, very bulky and it's what I usually call him like he's like the superhero Batman.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Almost an idealized Batman
Yeah.
in a sense. Yeah. It's very much it's not something like the Morrison Batman. We refer to that era of Batman as by the writer's name, right? And I think we have continued that. Like I refer to the version of Batman that Tom King wrote as the King Batman,
Mm,
which is different from the Batman who came later and who came before, right? So we
mm,
get these impressions, stamps of creators on their vision of this character. And this one seems more generic, but not in a bad way. To me, this, like I said, it's a bit of an idealized version of Batman that just it harkens back to something. It's very nostalgic in a sense, but it's not something that is. Uh, presenting him as like the 1966 Batman,
Right.
type thing. Not
Right.
that that's what they were trying to do at all, but
Right.
yeah. So it's yeah. I really like how this Batman. In fact, since it just happens to be that we're talking about it all these years later, and this is not a Batman World's Finest podcast by any means, but given what you just said, and I know you've been reading World's Finest with Mark Waid writing that Batman.
Mm-hmm.
Do you see similarities there? Because I can see some myself, but I was
Sure.
curious.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So yeah, so in other words, it seems like Waid is being consistent in what he believes Batman is or should be portrayed as.
Right. Presenting him as the version that is going to show up on T-shirts and
Mm.
lunch boxes and notebooks. Um, I was getting very strong feelings of how Perez drew Batman in JLA Avengers, but also how Busiek wrote
Oh
Batman
yeah,
in that
yes.
one as well.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yep.
So it seems like um, there's this standardized superhero Batman that is so easy to bring in, especially when you're dealing with like the larger DC universe, which Mark Waid does so well. And in this particular title, Waid is really just dumping on DC knowledge in the way that Waid was good at this
Mm-hmm.
time.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the reason why I like World's Finest so much is because and Batman versus Robin and little parts of Lazarus Planet. He's still doing the larger DCU stuff, but it's not wrapped in nostalgia. It has a little bit. It's a very different feel. I think Waid has found like a new voice in current comics, whereas this one's like, oh, the Hawk people have the Absorbicon. Okay, there we go. DC, 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 DC. The whole Book of Destiny, of course. I haven't expected when all of these little, since Batman's in the future and it's because of this device, there's like some chronal energy, time energy, and these other things start popping in from different times. I was like, how dare Waid and Perez not call back things that we've seen before, right? Like the intelligence or the, what are they called? The Rimborian razors. I was like, oh, why couldn't they be, I don't know, things that we've seen before in the
Mm-hmm.
larger DCU? I almost was like disappointed that they weren't doing the whole nostalgia thing in those cases. But yeah, they're so good at that, and he is the Superman. He is the superhero character here. Perez draws him like that. Um, it has shades of how he drew him in the history of the DC universe, going all the way back, because he has that very broad bat symbol across his chest with no yellow oval. The costume is darker. It's still got a bluish gray tint to it. It's not totally black like it was in History of the DC Universe, but and it's very bright yellow utility belt. So, and there's some other connections I'll make later, but yeah, all these characters. It's sort of what I said about the Legion. Like, yeah, Adam Strange looks a little different. Supergirl looks a little different, but you know who they are. That's the
Mm-hmm.
strength of both Waid and Perez and company. And I felt that way about the Legion too, as I talked about before. And I'm curious why you feel what's your thing about Brainiac 5 that what do you?
It's just Brainiac 5 is my favorite Legionnaire, right? And
Mhm.
so he's different in this version compared to the Brainy that we are reading in our main discussion
Right.
episodes, right?
Titles in 1987. Yeah. Or
Yeah.
in the 80s. Yeah.
And while Brainy can be our Brainy can be abrupt and abrasive at times. He's not, well, I guess he can be condescending at times, but it's not an overt characteristic. Whereas I felt like in this issue, and I it's true to the characterization of Brainiac 5 in the version of the Legion that we have, that I recall when I was reading that title. But it just grates on my nerves. There were so many. In fact, I wrote only just a few down. It's like, he's like being very commanding and condescending. Like I said, don't touch, fire bad. Um, am I getting through to you? I mean, he's talking to Batman.
Right.
See all the pretty lights? It's
Yeah.
just like, oh my God, shut up.
I loved the fire bad thing. I thought that was hysterical because he kept.
I mean, yeah, it's funny. It is funny,
So
but it's
funny.
like, oh,
And
come
he's
on.
referring to him as a Cro-Magnon or,
Yeah.
basically a caveman. And even though it's been 1,000 years, and I sort of think back, we're in 2023 in the year 1023, were we were civilized back then, more or less, weren't we? I don't remember. I don't know. I thought that was funny. Was any of that because of the whole "Eat It, Grandpa" motto that this particular Legion had? Was he being condescending because Batman's also older than him?
Oh, I no, I don't think that.
You don't think
I don't,
it's not
no,
resonating any of
it's
that?
all about I am the smartest guy in the room, and everybody else is dumb, but you're really dumb because you're 1,000 years before us,
Right, right,
even though he's freaking Batman.
right.
And they establish at the very beginning of the story that he is indeed, because Saturn Girl scans his mind, that he isn't, or at least maybe it wasn't even Brainy that's like, well, at least he believes he is, or something like
Mhm.
that. But they establish very quickly that he is the Batman, and of course, once that is, and after they've separated the villain from Batman, that was an interesting plot point that was resolved very quickly between the end of last issue and this one. Um, but of course, they have to move the story along. And then you get this fanboyish, like I've never seen Invisible Kid characterized in this way, but it was kind of fun.
Yeah.
He's like the biggest Batman fan, and he's just like fanboying all over the guy. So those, like, while it irritated me a little bit because I don't like to see my favorite Legionnaire portrayed in such a negative light in some ways. Uh, it was fun to see. Well, my larger point, I guess, about this is that these Legionnaires have such personality. Wade and Perez are bringing such personality to them for the ones that do get that kind of spotlight. Not everybody does, because, like I said, Shadow Lass is just there, and we don't really get her. Even compared to our beloved Legion that we're covering in the Baxter run,
Mm-hmm.
in some ways.
I mean, Brainy, Invisible Kid, Karate Kid, those are the three that really get the most focus. And then you might have a level below, occasionally, Atom Girl, Light Lass a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
But the ones that they focused on, and for those people who maybe weren't reading this particular version of the Legion of Superheroes called the Three Boot era, in their rocket ship they had a space that had old DC comics.
That's right.
They were always
Yes.
on the floor. They were always reading them. So much like in our version of the Legion that we're reading from comics in the 80s, their method of hearing about the heroic age is through comic books that have continued on 1,000 years later. So I almost can see that, like, Invisible Kid is almost like, Batman has come to life out of the pages of the very things that he's reading.
Do you recall? I mean, I remember seeing the comics.
Yeah.
In the issues, and there's this whole I because of that Wade interview that I mentioned, there were some other things that I was reading as well, talking about the Three Boot Legion and the fact that it's it gets revealed that they are the Legion of Earth Prime, if I remember correctly.
Which would also make sense why they're reading the comics.
Exactly. And so, but what I don't remember in the Legion book is if they played that up, or was it just kind of an Easter eggish type thing? It was, oh look, the Legionnaires are reading DC Comics, ha ha ha,
Yeah.
type
I,
thing.
I think it's both because there was an issue later where, and the letter columns were drawn as opposed to written, right? I don't know if you remember that the letter columns, they actually would have some of the Legion characters reading
Oh no, I forgot about
letters.
that.
Yeah. So it was very, Wade was trying to make it a title that was sort of all encompassing. It wasn't
Huh.
just a generic another comic, you know. So I think there is some evidence to that. Not that he brings it up here, not that he should, right? It's a side book.
An outlier type, yeah.
Yeah,
But yeah, that whole meta quality is that's not really his milieu. It's that sounds more like Morrison would do something like that. But
yeah.
it's interesting that he was playing with that a little bit, at least a little bit.
There was even that one cover that they did like a legacy numbering to, right? Like they said something like this is actually issue number 500 and something, and standing in the middle is Dawnstar and Block and someone else, and referencing a whole other version of the Legion. So, you know, yeah, I think he had that in mind very much.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and you know, even though Brainiac is being, you know, a little bit of a jerk, he does get an elbow to the face. So,
And he gets his flight ring stolen by
which is
Batman.
great. Come on,
Yeah.
that's great. That's awesome.
Yeah. What does he say? One of the characters, yeah, Invisible Kid, aren't you coming? This should be a cinch. You're the one who keeps insisting he's a Cro-Magnon. I'd love to accompany you, but for your information, that Cro-Magnon stole my flight ring.
Yeah. And I love the callback because in the beginning they're trying to ask him questions, but then he's turning it around and asking them questions. And one of the first things he learns is about the flight ring.
Yes.
And
Mm-hmm.
how, you know, so he is Batman.
Yeah, I particularly love that. Like you mentioned, he's calm and he finds himself in the situation. Uh, they know who he is, and normally I think we would see a Batman who'd be like freaking out a little bit about people knowing who he is, but he's just sitting there calmly taking everything in,
Mm-hmm.
as you would think that Batman would do. He's like a data sponge. He's always taking stuff in and then uses that to his advantage. I think that's his greatest strength more
Right.
than anything else. It's not his utility belt. It's his intellect and how he processes this information. And he's, like you said, he's asking questions. He has a commanding presence without being overtly uh the the biggest guy in the room, so to speak.
Right. Right. And
I
he does
love
that
I love
later
that.
when they're trying to search for him. Even the science police are like, we are the future. How, it's broad daylight.
And he's dressed like a bat in
And
broad
he's
daylight.
dressed like a bat. And they can't find him.
Well, that's one of those great comic book conceits is that Batman, he can be right next to you 1 second and then the next he's not, and
Right.
somehow you missed it,
Right.
which is just impossible, right? But it's fun. It's that's a fun comic book thing,
Yeah.
and this is the kind of like the inverse of that. It was where it's like he's standing out there in the middle of everywhere and you can't find him, and also an entire legion is after him, and he's able to take them out one by one by one.
We
It's just
talked we talked before about their arrogance, right? Like they do have an arrogance when it comes to who they are, and sometimes it bites
that
them
is
in the
true.
nose, you know.
Yeah.
I love the part where when they are searching for him and you have Triplicate Girl going, okay, I'm going to attack him from three sides. You guys handle the fourth. And then they're like, well, what happened to her? She's tied up in a knot. It made me think of, I swear somewhere along the way, Batman at one point studied Houdini or mentions like Mr. Miracle in his or some. There's
Yeah. Yeah.
something about
Mm-hmm.
what he's learned about from a quote unquote magician, you know, not like a Zatanna type, but you know, an escape artist, I should
Yeah.
say, you
Mm-hmm.
know. And that moment felt very much like that, you know.
Yeah. He tied us into a Siamese human knot. Holy hamstrings. uh,
It's fun. I keep looking at the cover, Batman's logo, the way they design his cover
mm-hmm.
logo. That feels very much like what you were saying before about what era of the Batman this is. That particular version, feels to me like the classic era Batman, almost 60s,
Yeah.
70s, you know, even though I think they used
Yeah.
it um, uh, probably also when he was the more dark and brooding one. But that's what we get here. We get the one we don't
Mm-hmm.
have to see how he does it to Triplicate Girl. That's a strength for
Yeah.
Perez too. We just he's like, all right, this is a cool effect. Let me use this one character who can divide into three, and when we see her, she's going to be all tied up, and Batman is nowhere to be found because you don't need to see. You just know that's what Batman does.
Mm-hmm.
And then when you do have to see him with the fight with Karate
I
Kid,
was just, yeah, that's where I was going to go too, because we get that that dichotomy of he does things behind the scenes,
mm-hmm,
or you know, in between the gutters, to use comic book parlance, but then we get this two almost, well, 1.5 pages of a fight scene between him and Karate Kid, which, you know, that's given Batman's prowess as a fighter, you know, this is a great little moment to really dive into the action of the scene and expand the scene, as opposed to just what happened before with some of the other characters, which were,
mm-hmm,
you know, one panel resolutions. This fight isn't even resolved because it's interrupted by another one of those temporal um, rift monster things coming through.
mm-hmm.
So we don't find out who's the better fighter, even though Karate Kid is like, ooh, I could learn so much from this guy, and they, you know, they go toe to toe, and you know, he Karate Kid's Batman berates him by saying, "Don't talk so much," and Karate Kid misinterprets that. He says, "Does it distract you?" And Batman's like, "No, you dummy." I mean, it doesn't say dummy, but you know, that's I love that. And it reminded me a lot of that scene in, because you mentioned JLA Avengers earlier.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Reminded me of that fight scene between Batman and Captain America.
Yep.
It's kind of the same thing.
And that came out in 2003. So, you know, again, I mean, first of all, it's a 12 panel page. Awesome. No backgrounds, just to give attention to the foreground characters.
Mm-hmm.
Probably also because, you know, for speed. I mean, he does have to draw the whole book, you know. It's okay that he doesn't draw backgrounds for once. But
But it
they're
also makes sense because they're flying.
right,
We're seeing the sky as the background, right?
right.
And so that's why it's kind of what I was talking about before about, you know, Perez just knows how to construct a scene so that you get exactly what you need from the story.
Mm-hmm.
And even though sometimes he throws in like all these details, it still contributes to what we are seeing on the page, right?
Right.
Whereas this, just the no background thing, it's because it makes sense, like I said, because they're
Yep.
flying. But it's, you know, we don't need all that stuff
Right.
because the focus is on these two.
Right.
Whereas some other artists may not throw something in the background because they just don't want to for some reason.
Right. The absence of detail is just as important as the
Yes.
scale it sets. Yeah.
Yes. It is intentional.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And his fight choreography has always been something that is um, been very, very strong.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, he's so good about delineating powers and what they look like and how they should be presented on the page. But his fight choreography, there's an issue during the Busiek run with the Avengers, and they're fighting the Squadron Supreme, and this is like sometime in the late 90s, and there's a particular fight sequence that because there are a cast of thousands, you can follow where the characters are, who they're fighting, what happens in reaction to a confrontation. Then he switches the camera angle to somebody else, but in the background the previous confrontation is still going on
Yeah.
in a logical sense. I mean, and that's what you see here. Yeah, he's a master of his craft. Absolutely. I love that scene because of it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, and one of the things I put in my notes about this scene is that, you know, Batman, he's, you know, because he's Batman, he's so good no matter how inexperienced he might be. So he's using the flight ring, and you know, he's not known for being a flyer,
Yeah.
but yet he is able uh, as Perez shows him here, they he's engaging with Karate Kid and Karate Kid with Batman in a in a the choreography is shown in a way that makes sense if you were levitating.
Mm-hmm.
It's
Mm-hmm.
not something that like that. It's the fifth panel in on that page where Karate Kid is flipped over and kicks Batman. And that's not something you would, in the way that it's portrayed, it's not something you would see if they were fighting on the ground. It would be drawn
Right.
differently.
Right.
And yet, because they're levitating, they're flying around fighting, that totally makes sense that they would make use of that situation to fight differently.
Right.
And that is, I think, just freaking brilliant
Yeah.
on Perez's part.
So what'd you make of the wrap up of their confrontation? He has the device. Phantom Girl finds it. She's going to shoot him. But then both Brainiac 5 and and obviously Batman, they realize what has to happen because the device doesn't work in the beginning when they want to use it on Batman to, I assume, send him back in time.
Mm-hmm. Or at
Uh,
least that's the idea, that it could
right,
happen. They don't know what's going to happen if Brainiac 5 pulls that trigger, but Batman's like, do it.
right. And it doesn't work.
Mm-hmm.
But yet, when Phantom Girl is confronting confronting the device, or confronting Batman with the device, Brainiac 5 says, uh, the Haruspex will fire only when its target is perceived as a threat. Target locked, fire. I am assuming it was going to fire. Wasn't Batman a threat in the first pages when he was in front of the device? Because Brainiac's ready to fire. It doesn't work. Why is he not perceived as a threat there as opposed to at the end? I mean, he even says, look around you. We have no time to argue. Pull the trigger now. I mean, maybe it's because he's not being confrontational, but he's certainly being loud.
Yeah, I think that's really what it is.
Is that what it is?
He's not coming well, and also you can compare this scene to that later one. The way Batman is drawn, the way he's being perceived, is completely different.
Yeah.
I agree that the difference here is kind of negligible in one sense,
Mm-hmm.
because in that panel, I don't know, there's no page numbers. In the
Yeah.
earlier scene, he is drawn a little bit antagonistically, and like you said, he's yelling, but it, it's not threatening. But that's, I think that's a fine line there in the way that it's drawn. So maybe this is one instance where the Paris should have done something a little different to drive that point home.
Yeah. I guess
Where
maybe intention also matters because, as you talked about in the definition of the word, it looks inside, right? Like the someone who looks at the entrails, at the inside. So maybe the way Batman internally was like, "Oh my God, use it! Go ahead, do it now, so we can stop this." It's more,
oh yeah,
you
yeah,
know,
yeah.
he's
It senses that he's not an enemy.
right.
He's not threatening. But even okay, so let's go with that thought. Like I said, he's perceived, or he's being shown in shadow as he approaches Phantom Girl,
Mm-hmm.
and uh, he says, "Just try it," as he's approaching her. And does he say anything else? No. And then yeah, he doesn't say anything else, and he's just shown as menacing.
Well, but then Saturn Girl says before he hasn't gone mad. He's saving the 31st century. We've completely mistaken his motives. So if it is a brain thing, if it's his intention, like if he's thinking I'm gonna punch her in the face, like, but yet Saturn Girl just said, well, I guess he could do both at the same. He could think both at the same time.
I think so. Yeah. Again, this goes back to Batman being Batman. He can convince others, and apparently this device. What I don't remember is it an alien device or is it a future? I don't remember, but um, I think that's the intent of this scene, is to show he's committed to harming these characters, Phantom Girl in particular, so that he can obtain his goal, which is for the Haruspects to zap him.
Mm-hmm.
But then they also do this whole thing with Dream Girl, uh, which is, I thought, was kind of weird because as I recall, Dream Girl is dead, so to speak,
Mm-hmm.
in the Legion book, and yet they bring her back in this title.
Mm-hmm.
It seemed like a weird plot point to bring in. If you're reading both books, it seems like a weird plot point to bring her back in this title as opposed to the Legion title. But again, to your point earlier, you don't need to know that. It doesn't matter because Dream Girl is just there. Here's another Legionnaire. If you're unfamiliar with that series and these characters, it's just that she's here and she has this vision, but that doesn't. How does that connect with Batman being perceived as a threat by the Haruspects?
I think her inclusion, I think, has more to do with whatever comes after.
Yeah,
that's what I think. I think it's Wade's way to continue the story later.
Oh yeah, sure. But in terms of, because it seems like Dream Girl is the only reason why Phantom Girl is pulling that trigger. She hesitated with Batman at first, but it's only when Dream Girl says, "Tinya, fire before it's too late, fire," and then that next scene, it looks like she's doing so.
Right.
And then we get the resolution on that same page with the Luck Lord taking the device.
Well, maybe she was too late. She meant fire on Batman because she knew if she doesn't, this is the outcome. And now we're really in trouble.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It was a little confusing. The ending was, I was like, that's confusing.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, I agree.
And because I'm not reading onward, I didn't read the previous ones, I don't know if there's any context prior, like all of it it fell apart there a little bit at the end, but maybe that's why you got to continue on with JLMay. You go listen to Ed Moore for issue 6 and, you might find out more. That's the whole purpose of this podcast crossover.
Where do we go from here?
Yeah, right. Exactly.
Yeah. I did not read issue 6 in this reread because I don't know why. I should have. Well, probably because I didn't want to have our conversation tainted by what I know about what comes next, even though I read the previous issues. But this, even though I love this team up, quote unquote team up between Batman and Legion, it really is more of a diversion in a lot of ways from the main story, right, that we're getting in these, at least in these first 6 issues. So,
anything else about the Batman Legion part? We should probably address the other one too for a little bit.
Let's see here. We're just talking about that scene with Phantom Girl. Oh, by the way, I love that they put. I'm sure this is a Kitson thing, but I love how they put black gloves on Phantom Girl. I think that's a great contrast, and I know how much you love that character. So I was curious at what you thought of Tinya in the 3-boot Legion.
I don't have enough experience with it. I mean, I've read it and bits and pieces of it at the time, and it doesn't. This whole Legion doesn't. It's probably the reason why I reacted so strongly to the fact that they didn't have to wear these costumes. They could have worn the 1987 costumes and they would have been perfectly fine. So I really have I'd have to do way more reading to get that. She looks great though.
Yeah. But what I really wanted to say about this is like like we said, this ending kind of is like, what? Because she's there because Batman's taken out Starboy, and this is it's on this page where we first see Batman coming again, and he's all in shadow, and looks menacingly coming towards her. And suddenly she's like, she yells, "No, stay back. I have a weapon." And she's holding the Haruspex, right? And
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, what? Why does she feel threatened by Batman? He yeah, he's coming towards her, but she can turn immaterial. What how is that how
Mm.
is that a problem for her? It was a weird story point that was like, that doesn't make sense to me
Mm.
that she would react that way.
Unless it says something about, unless it's her character within the larger
I,
framework of this
that
particular Legion.
that
Plus, he
could be.
did
I
he did just take down almost half the team.
Sure,
I
but
mean,
I don't know. I just didn't. I didn't. That
he's
didn't make sense to me
he's
that she would
Batman.
react this way. Yeah, that's the whole thing. That's the metatextual aspect of this. Is like, even in the 31st century, he scares people.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think maybe that's there's a few construction things I like about this that we see on page 16. We see uh, the two black and white clad characters, Phantom Girl and Starboy, together,
Mm-hmm.
that paired up. I like how Atom Girl's dialogue is smaller than everybody else's when she talks, and then Micro Lad's is larger when he's big.
Mm-hmm.
That's a great little lettering thing to denote the volume of their voices. That's those little things like that just really accentuate a good reading experience for me.
One point to your Phantom Girl thing, in the second page where Brainiac is separating Batman from Tharok, and he says, "Listen closely. You're in the 31st century. We are the guardians of this era, which will seem a utopia to you. Over the past 10 centuries, interstellar travel has created a federation of united planets, sharing resources, technology. We have attained near universal peace, eradicated disease and famine. Our technology would seem like magic to you." Maybe that's why she's so thrown off. He is such an era of a different time. There is nobody like Batman in this world. He couldn't
Mm,
exist in this world because there are no shadows in this world, right? And yet he has managed to find them even in this world. So maybe that has some, maybe just the mere presence of this person who is, it's one of the reasons, what we're talking about it in the current Legion run that we're reading, or the 80s run. None of them wear masks,
mm-hmm.
right? There's no reason to hide. There's no reason to be in the shadows in this kind of society. And now you have this one this almost elemental being who can take their environment and just use it to his advantage.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe that is scary.
Well, yeah, I can see that.
Yeah.
I can't disagree with that at all. Yeah, like I said, it just seemed weird to me.
Yeah.
I will say, given what you just said, maybe Batman does have a superpower. And maybe it's his ability to tap into that lizard part of our brains that makes us want to
Oh, sure.
flight.
Yep.
What is that? Fight or flight? Yeah, that
Mm-hmm.
whole cut. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Criminals are a superstitious and cowardly lot,
Yeah.
right? I shall become a bat. That's there it is.
And
All right.
occasionally he can turn it on to non-criminals. So,
Yeah.
all
Well, let's
right.
talk about Supergirl, Green Lantern, Adam Strange. I don't really
Mm-hmm.
have too much to it other than Perez, it's a whole other civilization. Technology looks, it looks somewhat similar, but yet there are differences, and it's also the environment's very different, right? Suddenly we're
Mm-hmm.
in trees and nature, and um, boy, does he not shortchange how many Thanagarians you actually see, and uh, how many people are in the resistance in the cave or wherever they're at, and um, he is so damn good at. There's Adam Strange in his current look. There's Supergirl in her current look, but she's very youthful. And there's Hal Jordan looking like the Hal Jordan that he has always drawn from way back when he started on the Justice League of America in the 80s, or late 70s, early 80s, whenever that was. So love it. Love all that.
Well, and he even he's incorporated elements of Green Lantern of the time with the insignia that is a illuminated badge
Yep.
that they played around with a lot in the Green Lantern title of the time.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not overt. I mean, you obviously see it, but in at least one panel. Yeah, he's showing us the classic version in a sense, but also incorporating elements from the recent stuff. So
Right.
that's nice. I like the details of involving Supergirl. Um, she's so overcharged because of the trinary star system that she's
Mm-hmm.
in that because she's carrying both of them and that she's flying and she's going around Ran so quickly and not even realizing it because she's hopped up on sunlight that even yeah Adam Strange says you dragged us clear around the planet. We passed the same Hawkman twice now. And then we get it's because it's a trinary system and she's looking a little um I don't know or she says
Juiced.
I'm all tingly, it's like a sunburn but it feels good.
Yeah.
Juiced is a good
She's on the juice.
at the very least. I what I appreciate about this situation between Supergirl and Green Lantern is that Wade has dropped the whole Supergirl trying to get with Hal Jordan that was in the earlier some of the at least one of the
Uh,
earlier issues. It's like, oh boy, that was I did not like that
uh,
aspect. So he's completely dropped that here. So I'm very happy about that.
hmm. I think it's a little bit there in the artwork. She kind of looks at Hal a lot, or she's always standing next to Hal.
That
So
is true. Yeah.
yeah, but
Yeah.
I get your point.
But that's Perez keeping the through line of that idea that we've already seen. So
Right.
that's to me, that's brilliant on his part.
I do love when they the people of Ran call Adam Strange an Earth Billy.
That was a new term to me at that time.
Yeah, I'll say. Wow. People in space are not from other planets. They're not nice.
Well, we are Cro-Magnons at
Yeah.
this in this time period.
Species. Love the transition when they're looking into the book and then they turn back around and the Lords of Luck are standing behind them. That's great.
Oh my God. Yes. Yeah. So we see, so the Book of Destiny shows the heroes what is happening right now. We see the Luck Lords behind them. Supergirl starts to turn, and we're seeing that through her eye. Her eye is moving, as I presume her head is too.
Hmm.
We see the reflection of a Luck Lord's head in her eye, and then we see a Luck Lord's eye reflecting them. I, it's so good.
It's so good. He's so good. It's funny because we're going to be getting to the Luck Lords in the
Mm.
regular Legion project in like another handful of issues, probably about 5, 6 issues or so,
Oh, so I speaking of the Luck Lords, I had
or
to look them
episodes, I
up.
should say.
Should I wait? Should I hold that for the for that later episode?
Probably. I mean, they don't, like
There's
the
not
thing.
much to it.
No, I mean, the thing I loved about it here is that Perez just goes with the classic look of them. He's just like, I'm not going to try to totally redesign them. I'm just going to present them as they are in their eyeball nature with their gowns and outside of the creepy arms.
Okay, so you say that, but then when I was looking them up, that's not.
It's how I know them from what we're going to read.
Yeah, I think that's it.
Yeah.
Because in their first appearance, they do not look like this. So that's I thought that was that was one of the things I was going to look up as well. Was so when did they transition to this look? Because I'm sure this is what is considered now the classic look of the Luck
Right.
Lords.
Which I think more is what Wade is, he wants that.
Mm-hmm. Well,
Which is
it's
fine.
such a great design with an
Yeah.
eyeball head. Come
Yeah.
on, that is great comic book design right there. And yeah, how do they talk? It's just an eyeball. I love it.
Yeah. Because what were they before? Like just they were in hoods. They almost look like Dark Circle members more than what they look like here.
Oh yeah, yeah. They were. They were green-skinned aliens with large eyes, but they had white hair. They wore these robes, and like I said, I'll talk more about them when we get to that issue in
Yeah.
the main show
Yeah,
main
let's not give it
feed.
all away. Let's,
Yeah.
if we got some new listeners, you're gonna have to go and listen to other episodes. That's the whole point of this crossover, right?
All right.
Yeah, that's really it. I mean, it was as I read it, I was like, yeah, this reminded me of why I like this series so much. I think it's a worthy title for this kind of like podcast crossover because it allows for, you have the celebration of the Justice League of America, as we talked about, because they were presented in Brave and the Bold way, 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 way back, as I remembered early in this issue. But it's a tour through the larger DC universe, which is just amazing.
Mm-hmm.
Um, all of the characters that are showing up. I mean, I picked up we could have done the Legion of Substitute issue that was in one of the later issues. There's certainly times where the Teen Titans show up. I think the Inferior Five show up at some point in this
Mm-hmm.
title. I mean,
Yeah.
that to me is that's great. I love books like this. I think that's why team up books are so popular among readers. Like people have soft spots for team up books because
Oh yeah.
you get to play around with as many characters as you can, or new villains, or new concepts, and those team up books are always. I feel like they are always a good example of what makes that particular universe so special.
Mm-hmm.
Like when you were talking about collecting both Marvel and DC, Marvel 2-in-1 has a long stretch of a Project Pegasus storyline that Perez is actually a part of. I love that because it's got team ups with all these different characters, but yet it made me love Project Pegasus because it was like unique to the Marvel universe, just like Star Labs is unique to the DC universe. So, yeah, we need more team up books.
Well, yeah, it's funny as you were describing team up books, I'm totally on board with what you're saying, and yet they don't either promote them or they don't sell well. I don't know what, but we don't get a team up book anymore, at least with any longevity. In fact, was this the last one that DC did?
I think wasn't there something during the New 52? I don't remember. I don't know if it was like necessarily, this particular title or anything, but
Mm-hmm.
no, maybe not.
They had an anthology title
Yeah,
where they may have had team ups, but it wasn't in this same vein as I recall. But I
right,
I could be
right.
wrong.
Do you have any other thoughts about the issue?
No, I think we basically covered everything that I have in my notes.
Yeah. Well, we are getting a new Brave and the Bold series. We could quickly throw that out for people who
Yes.
maybe, um, maybe it'll date it if you're listening to this 10 years later. But Dawn of DC, the new thematic relaunch of DC titles over at DC. We're recording this at the end of April 2023, and as we said, this will be released in May. A new Brave and the Bold title, which will be more anthology style,
Mm-hmm.
64 pages per issue. And it's going to have characters such as, obviously, Batman has the main feature. You're going to have a Stormwatch story, a Superman story, with artwork by Javier Rodriguez coming over from Marvel Comics. So that should
Oh
be
wow.
cool. And I think the lead feature is by Tom King and Mitch Gerrits, the first meeting of Batman and Joker. There's going to be a short story with Dan Mora. Yeah, it's. I don't know if it's an ongoing or if it's a miniseries, but it will release on May 16th. So there is a new Brave and the Bold series coming out.
I'm looking forward to reading that on the app
Yes, same here.
because I opted not to buy the issue.
And since we've been speaking of Perez, and boy, I hope people are saying his name right, and during this whole uh, podcast crossover, take a look or be prepared for the announcement of a George Perez fanzine called Pace Setter that has been going on for many years. It started off as the George Perez newsletter, and they eventually had to stop producing it, but they decided to do one more issue, issue number 17, to be released, they hope, in time for the 1 year passing of George Perez, which was May 6th of 2022. So a day after we released this issue. So Pace Setter 17 will have basically all tributes to the man, from many walks of life, from fans, from creators, and it is just a big tribute book, both in color hardcover or black and white softcover. And it will feature, people have presented their sketches that they might have gotten from Perez, some pictures that they might have taken with Perez, one or two unseen projects, and it is all put together by Tony and Marcus, the co-editors. And by the time you hear this, it should be announced, and you can check out a link, and it'll raise money for the Hero Initiative, which Perez was a part of. Yeah, I can't wait. Can't wait for people to see it.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to getting this myself. And when actually, I think I first heard about this new issue based on a post that you had done on Twitter or something. And then I went back and looked to see, can I get previous issues? And they're kind of scarce to find.
Yeah.
So if you're interested in this, it sounds like you need to jump on ordering it.
Absolutely. And as we mentioned, as I said, issue 4 of Brave and the Bold was, if you're coming to our podcast from the LEGION cast, welcome. And from here, to continue the story, go check out the Green Lantern Batman team up, issue number 6, over on Comic Book Noise, as produced by Teal Productions, hosted by Ed Moore. And you should go to Twitter and follow the hashtag JLMay 2023. We will be dumping all of our good info there. And the other participants, if you can indulge me, we started with the Overlooked Dark Knight podcast, Dial F for Flanger, the Bat Pod. I mentioned the Legion Podcast, our project, the Legion Project, Teal Productions, then continue onwards with the Right On Network, Justice Trek, Pop Culture Affidavit. It all comes back to Superman, Longbox Crusade, Resurrections, an Adam Warlock and Thanos podcast, Married with Comics, Superman in Crisis, The Lantern Cast, Podcast of Oa, JLI Bwahaha podcast, Rolled Spine, Weird Warriors, Magazines and Monsters, Once Upon a Geek, Head Speaks, Coffee and Comics, Aquaman and Firestorm, the Fire and Water podcast, Waiting for Doom, and the Fanholes podcast. So go check out the hashtag. I think that's your strongest way to get all the other titles, JLMay 2023. And thank you to Paul and all the rest for allowing us to play in their sandbox this year.
Yeah, this was fun.
Yeah.
Get to touch on a little bit of Legion that we normally wouldn't, I think.
That's right. Legion, Perez, Wade, Batman.
Oh yeah, all good, all the good things.
Yeah. All right, where can they reach you if they want to give you some feedback?
You can reach me at longboxreview@gmail.com. And where can they reach you, Peter?
Peter at thedailyrios.com. Do we know what we're doing for the next episode?
I don't know.
I don't know either. We thought about going to the movie, the animated movie, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Are we ready for that?
Have you watched it?
Not yet, but I could.
Oh, yeah. Oh, you could.
I could. If we want to do another Tales, because if we don't go into a Tales, if we go back into the regular series, we're going into those Millennium crossovers, the 2-issue Millennium crossover event.
Does that start with 42?
42? Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay.
43.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that might be a good way to roll out these next few episodes.
Right. Okay.
So do another Tales?
Possibly.
All right.
Right. We'll
Well, I
tease
guess
that.
they'll find out one way or the other.
Right. For listeners who are subscribed, you'll find out what it is. For anybody who's new, what we do with the regular Legion Project podcast is we do one issue at a time, just like this. And whatever the number of the Legion project, because this is a side project. Tales is a side project. So if it's Legion Project Podcast 42, that's issue 42. We are in the last third, I guess, of the 80s Legion of Superheroes Baxter run. It only goes up to 63 and we're at 42. So we're damn close.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So that's where we are right now. We're sort of in either we're going to talk about the Legion animated series movie that just came out, or we're going to jump into the Millennium crossovers, which, also has people, sort of like, ooh, but that's okay because we're finding good things about it. So if you subscribe for the first time, either on Eric's feed on the Longbox Review podcast or over on the Daily Rios, come and listen to us, not only on this show, but on everything else we do as well.
This was a lot of fun, like I said, to examine an issue that we probably normally wouldn't have done, at least not for a while.
Yeah.
It was a great little interlude and fun to take a look at something that I think we both look at very fondly.
Yeah.
Or remember very fondly as well. So yeah, this is a lot of fun to talk to you about this, Peter. So my thanks to everybody who got us on board to do this as well.
We'll talk to you soon.
Bye, everybody.